In our devotional reading just a few moments ago, we had identified exactly a group of people that could be benefited by our study today. And as we heard these inspired words of John on the Isle of Patmos, who had been exiled there because of his unfaithfulness to Rome and faithfulness to the Lord, he said, "He that hath ears to hear, let him hear." Well, now we can look out over the audience, and because the hairstyles have changed somewhat from previous generations, we can see a whole bunch of ears. But we're not sure if they are ears described by inspiration here in Revelation chapter 2. Because some people's ears are simply for the balancing of their head and are not really for the purpose expressed here in this text. If we have ears to hear, then that means we are contemplating as fully as possible at the time the opportunities that are available from actually hearing what God has to say, and not just for the purpose of saying I heard it, but for the purpose of actually putting into practice what we hear. That's the type of ears that each and every one of us not only should have, but the type of ears that we better have if we are going to be benefited by our study today. And if truly, as we've been singing these songs of wonderful situations as we arrive somewhere someday, if we cannot have that attitude towards God's Word, then we're not going to be happy where we arrive. Friends, it really is that important. What we're doing here is not just an exercise in futility. It's not just something to do because, after all, it's Sunday and not much else is going on. It is for the purpose of worshiping our God and becoming more familiar with His Word that we're supposed to be assembled here. Now, it may be that that's not the reason why you're here. But you need to repent and admit that's why you're supposed to be here today. Any study of the book of Revelation, of course, would be beneficial to us if we understood, to some extent, the background from which it's written. As a matter of fact, how many people do you think, those who would contend for a rapture and a 1,000-year reign and all such as that, reckon how many of those people have ever read the first verse of the book of Revelation? Revelation chapter 1 at verse 1 reads this way: "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto Him, to show unto Him, His servants, things which must shortly come to pass." Notice that phrase. Things which must shortly come to pass. And not only that, but the rest of the verse says, "And He sent and signified it by His angel unto His servant John." Now this phrase here, sent and signified, is also quite significant. Because the idea attached to the word signified is that through signs and symbols, the message of the book of Revelation is going to be made known. Yes, friends, we can understand as much as we need to the book of Revelation. And we can know of surety that it fits in with the totality of the rest of the Scripture. Therefore, if we have something in the book of Revelation that is a flat contradiction to something else in the Scripture, then we know that we are misunderstanding and have drawn an improper conclusion from something that we've read in the book of Revelation. If we have an idea that God was mistaken in what He was trying to accomplish in the first century, and that rebellious Jews thwarted His effort to establish a kingdom, and He had to come up with plan B, then we know that's not what the book of Revelation is talking about. Because we know that God cannot be limited in His ability to accomplish just exactly what He intends to accomplish, and even that in the book of Revelation. And yet, as we delve into this particular section of Scripture in the second chapter of the book of Revelation, then we understand that it fits into a two-chapter setting in which we find the Lord speaking concerning the affairs that are going on within 7 congregations of God's people, those congregations being known as the 7 churches of Asia. Now keep in mind that Asia then and Asia now are 2 different things. I want to notice here on this map, as we will look from a big picture and then we'll zero in to Pergamus or Pergamum, where we're going to get to right here in a few minutes. You might notice, if you have a halfway decent Bible that has pictures or has maps in the back of it, that this is simply a map showing the missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul. That means that over here, and I want to see if this thing works. It's supposed to. I don't guess it will. Okay, it won't. But if you'll notice over here at the bottom, at the legend over here at the bottom left-hand side, then you'll see the different colors represent the different journeys that Paul went on, of course. But if you'll notice, they all start over here on the right side at the bottom. Most of them do. As Paul would travel from the Palestine area or north of the Palestine area, and this whole big old area of water here is the Mediterranean Sea. Now, as we zero in just a little bit more, then we're going to be going in from around the area right up there above Greece, Athens, you see that? And then right over here is Asia. Very small, but it's going to get bigger as I show you the next picture. And then it's a little bit bigger there, and then it's even bigger there. And because they left off one of the 7 churches of Asia, then I had to put it in, and you'll see that it looks sort of silly sitting in there with the rest of those city names, and that's Thyatira. But there is Asia, properly Asia Minor. And all of these congregations in this very limited area are those to whom the 2nd and 3rd chapters are being addressed. And the specific things that were transpiring within those congregations, and of course, all a congregation is a conglomeration of members. You know, in other words, you don't have a church at Thyatira or a church at Laodicea or a church at Dunlap if you don't have individual members, Christians, who compose that church. And sometimes we will look at a congregation as a whole, but yet fail to recognize the essential parts of the whole. Without the essential parts, you don't have a whole. Without there being faithful members of the body of Christ anywhere in all the world, you don't have the Lord's church in that area. And as we focus even closer to this town of Pergamum, which is here on the top, then you'll see that it's a desert-like place. It's not a place where basically I don't live. It's a place that gets a whole lot of hot weather, not a whole lot of rain, and it's quite desolate. As a matter of fact, if this is the town, then this is a picture from a hill on which we're going to be looking at something was situated. Then you'll see that this goes on and on and on and on for miles from this central part of the town of Pergamus, or as it's now referred to as Pergamum. And there was something that was very interesting that was located at Pergamum, and it figures prominently into what is said in our reading from the 2nd chapter. There was, in fact, an altar that was world known in the city of Pergamum. It was referred to as the Great Altar of Zeus. And interestingly, there was a German by the name of Karl Humann who went to that area, and with the assistance of the Turkish government, they began to unearth and find the actual marble columns, the marble walls, the marble steps of this tremendously large, known around the world, altar of Pergamum. And they took it to Berlin, and you can see it even today. That's what it looks like. A grand structure that many in that day in Germany thought as well. This is more significant than the Parthenon. And so they went to great expense, and during World War II, great expense to hide it in different places so that it would not be bombed by us in many respects. And there it is, a colossal structure. And realizing that this is made out of marble and all of the hand carvings that we'll see even more of here in a minute is amazing. It served as a temple. A temple that was, in fact, in the middle of many other temples to various heathen deities that were all worshipped right here in Pergamum. You see, some people think that different religious groups existing within one town, and you could find the religious group of your choosing if you just drove down the road a little bit. That didn't just happen in America. That was going on way back here too. You see, if you didn't really get into worshiping the goddess Athena, then you could go on down the road and worship Athena's daddy, Zeus. Or you could go across town a little ways and you could worship another heathen deity. But yet in the center of this place was this great big altar in which all of the sacrifices were offered unto all of the different gods. It was built, of all things, by this man. And it has over 100 elaborate carved friezes of Greek gods. Now, what that means is that you have a partial carving of, it's not a statue, it's like a half of a statue. If you want to have a carving up here and it just comes out part way in the wall and it's not completely surrounded, that's a frieze. And it has over 100 of those, and they were remarkably preserved. Now, why would this city be such a prominent city, and why would people actually look to this city as a city in which there would need to be, of all things, a congregation of God's people? Well, during the time of the writing of the book of Revelation, it was one of the highest levels of prominence that the city had ever known. It was prominent because of its political position, of its military position, the arts, its economy, its culture, its education, and its pagan idolatry. It seems as though when you've got such smart people, such talented people, that are able to do amazing things with great skill, with great intelligence, and then no more sense than to bow down to something they've cut out of marble with their own hands, you have to question their intelligence. Even though they may have made straight A's all the way through school. They're not being very smart to bow down to an idol. And yet that's what they're doing. Because this was a key site for emperor worship, then it became not only focused because of the first place that emperor worship is actually engaged in Asia, but also all of these other gods too. And I want you to look at some of them right here. The first city in Asia, and this happened in AD 29, that actually erected a temple that was for the purpose of worshiping Caesar. Caesar had his own church. You've heard people say, well, one church is just good as another. Well, I guess in that day, they were saying that too. And so Caesar's church is just as good as anybody's, right? Well, no, Zeus's church is better than Caesar's church. Well, what about Athena's church? Well, and around and around and around you go. They even had a god of healing and a god of medicine. And this sort of reminded me of Oral Roberts, because right connected to the temple in which you could worship this idolatrous god, they also had a school of medicine. Let's see. Now, if you can heal miraculously, you don't need no hospital. Right? What do you need a hospital for if you're able with your right hand to call somebody to stand up and walk this lane? Don't make much sense. We'll see. People ain't been making much sense for over 2,000 years, folks. And even before that, too. Zeus, of course, was the king of the gods. Athena was the goddess of wisdom, so-called, war, the arts, industry, justice, and skill. And she, my friends, was the daughter of Zeus, who came right out of his head. I'm serious. Came right out of his head. No mama. Came right out of his head. And Dionysus, who was the god of wine, vegetation, pleasure, and festivity. And you probably know him better as his Greek counterpart was Bacchus. And he was a very, very licentious type god. Now here is a picture of these friezes. Here where they have carved out of solid marble these various heathen deities in all different forms, fighting all different types of battles, and yet remarkable artmanship. Now here's the scale model of this great altar that you saw back there, and there's some more of the friezes and all these things that were dug up by a German and transported all the way over to Berlin. Here's the sanctuary of Athena. And then there's where they actually found the inscription over this great entranceway. King Eumenes to Athena, bringer of victory. And of course what people oftentimes fail to realize, and this is what children of Israel had difficulty realizing too, with all these heathen deities that they ended up adopting and began to worship in Canaan. If the gods of the Canaanites are so powerful, how could it be possible for Joshua to run right through their armies? Duh. You know, can't people figure a little bit every now and then? Why, no. Once you're offered a little bit of wine, a little bit of sexual promiscuity, then all that's out the window, I reckon. But that's the type of thing you got there. And then in the face of all of this, you've got a fellow mentioned by the name of Antipas, who is referred to as being a faithful witness. And that's significant, obviously. Whenever you find inspiration recording for you the words of the Holy Spirit through holy men of God who penned that a man is a faithful witness. But when you realize that he's a faithful witness in a city that is described as being where Satan's seat is, that's described as being where Satan dwelleth, he's a faithful witness there? With all this heathen idolatry around? He's not only a faithful witness there, but he's a faithful witness to the point that he is a martyr for the cause of Christ. Think about this. Here's a man living in the midst of all of these heathen ways, and yet he lived in such a way that it was obvious, not only to those that knew him, but it was obvious to the Lord too, that here was a man who could not be influenced by the world to give up his faith. Powerful influence? No doubt about it. Did he feel like he was maybe marching to his own drum every now and then? Probably so. But yet he absolutely would not allow the influence of Satan to influence him. And of course that calls to mind Romans chapter 12 verse 1 and 2. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now you take Antipas, sitting in a city that is like this where Satan dwells, and then apply the verse of Scripture here spoken by Paul, the church at Rome, and you see a guy that keeps on getting bigger and bigger, spiritually speaking, every minute. As a matter of fact, we could go so far as to say that when it came to the world and what the world had to offer and what the world would tempt Antipas with, he refused to fall in love with the world. Which reminds us, of course, of John in 1 John chapter 2, beginning verse 15. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, what, John? What? If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life, get this, is not of the Father, it's of the world. Okay, now let's look at it from a common sense standpoint. The world passeth away, and everything associated with it, the lust thereof, they pass away too. But the word of the Lord, does it pass away? No, it endures forever. Okay, here we got. Here we got the world and what the world has to offer, and here we got God and what God has to offer. The world offers what it offers, and oh man, it serves it on a silver platter, man. It's pretty, it's pretty. Sounds good, smells good, tastes good. But at last, let's see, lived to be as old as 100. It's gone. That's it. Boy, he lived his life. He did what? He lived his life to the very zenith. I mean, he reached for all the gusto. That old Schlitz beer commercial was made just for him. He did what? He lived his life? No, he wasted his life. And now, he's gone with the world. Not very smart. Living? I don't call that living. I call that a slow death, what I call it. And then throughout eternity, regret after regret after regret after regret. No, there's not any wisdom at all associated with that. But, on the other hand, you got Antipas. He's not unduly influenced by the world, nor what the world has to offer. He actually made a choice. He made a choice that he was going to serve God, and he was not going to serve Satan. Somebody says, yeah. He made the choice. The choice that every single solitary human being that's accountable to God can make, and get this, does make. Most do the wrong choice, but they make the choice nonetheless. You see, because while for every Antipas that made the right choice, you got a whole bunch more than Antipas at Pergamos, a whole lot more than Antipas at Thyatira, a whole lot more than Antipas at Philadelphia, a whole lot more than Antipas in Dunlap, a whole lot more than Antipas in Pikeville. Make their own choice. Instead of serving God and not serving Satan, they choose to serve Satan and not to serve God. Somebody said, I just don't know if you can go so far as to make it that cut and dry. Well, how would you make it? How did Jesus make it? You either love me or you hate me. You either cling to me or you despise me. You cannot serve God and anybody or anything else. There's no middle ground, folks. Enter ye in at the sort of straight gate, the sort of narrow way. It's a little bit wide, sometimes narrow, other times wide, narrow, wide, narrow, wide. That's not the way it is. It's either the straight and the narrow or the wide and the broad. Which? One or the other. This or that. Not both. Not neither. One of them. We got to make that choice. And Antipas made that choice. Another thing that I think that we could honestly say about Antipas is that he not only believed something about Jesus, and by that I mean he's the Son of God. He is the only begotten of the Father, with the Father, the Spirit from eternity, in a pre-incarnate form. But because of that, because he believed that, then he had a certain type of life that he was compelled to live. It was a life for Christ. It was a life with Christ. It was a life in promotion of what Christ was and is all about. And he could have never done that if he had not known anything about Christ and if he had not done what he knew to know about Christ. Impossible. The seed of the kingdom is the Word of God. The parable of the sower in Luke chapter 8, Matthew chapter 13, same principle. There's all types of hearts out there, but the good and the honest heart is the only heart that will bring forth fruit to God's honor and glory. And Antipas chose to be that type of heart. And we choose what type of heart we be. Maybe this principle of prove all things, hold fast that which is good, was one that was a motivating factor in the life of Antipas. Reckon? And when Paul would say to the Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 at verse 15, to stand fast and hold to the traditions that had been passed down to them from the apostles, then something like that was exactly what Antipas was doing as well in the city of Pergamum. In Revelation chapter 3, verse 8, notice what it says. Not only did Antipas not deny the person of Christ, he did not deny the doctrine of Christ either, which is referred to as my name and my faith. And that is the same terminology used in Revelation 3 verse 8 concerning the church at Philadelphia. They had kept my word and they had not denied my name. Now here's the thing about my word and my name and the connection of the name to the word. You can't separate it without doing damage to either. And let me ask you something. Which one would you want to do damage to? Didn't Jesus say in John chapter 12 at verse 48, he that rejecteth me and receiveth not my word hath one to judge with him. The word that I have spoken, the same for judgment the last day. Somebody says, oh, we hear so much about the plan. We just want to know about the man. Jesus said it's the man and the plan together. You cannot separate the two. And why would someone want to unless they think that they don't have any requirements if they just hold to Jesus in some ambiguous type of way that make no sense? In 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 8, remember about that fellow that provides not for his own, and especially for his own household, he's denied the faith, and he's worse than an infidel. What's he done? He's denied the faith. He's failed to live in accordance with the faith system Jesus Christ made possible. You mean if a man don't provide for his own family, then he's denied the faith? Well, that's what Paul said. And I'm out to agree with him. Not only that, 2 Timothy chapter 2 at verse 12, Paul said that if we suffer, we'll also reign with him. But if we deny him, what do you think would follow that? Suffer, reign with him. Deny him, he'll go ahead and affirm us. Or how about deny him, he will deny us? Why would he affirm those who deny? That doesn't make any sense. You see, that would make the Lord in the business of interfering with a man's free moral agency. A person says, I don't believe in Jesus. Jesus says, you do believe in me. No, he can't do that. Man says, I'm not going to pay any attention to living like God says. God says, live like I say. No, he's not going to violate a man's free moral agency. If a person wants to do contrary to God's will, then God is going to let him. In spite of the fact that he provides him with every encouragement and motivation that could be possible, he'll still not interfere with a man's free moral agency. Antipas refused to live as a hypocrite. Titus chapter 1 verse 16. Here's some people described by Paul. They profess that they know God. Talk, say, but in works they deny him. The things that they do are abominable. They are disobedient. And to every good work they are reprobate. Now here's a question to consider. All right? Here's some people that make a claim to one thing, but in actuality it's the opposite. Does the claim override the actuality? Or is the actuality a demonstration of hypocrisy? Well, it's of course like, I love the Lord. What was that I smell on your breath? He didn't give in to error. If you notice, the congregation here at Pergamus, they had some real problems. Now, here's a point that I think we need to give some attention to. Because, obviously, if there was not some straightening up in what was being taught and what was being done in that congregation, then they were going to cease to be the Lord's faithful people, for sure. They tolerated false doctrine. They conducted themselves in many respects as hirelings. But yet, in the midst of all of that unfaithfulness in the congregation, here was a fellow willing to die for the cause of Christ. Now, just as there were false prophets among the children of Israel of old, Peter says there will be false prophets among you. And just as that was the case with those about whom Peter makes a reference here in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 1, even so there were false prophets that were in existence in the congregation there at Pergamos. He did not give up on the truth in the midst of worldliness. It would have been easy. As Jude was writing a letter about one thing, the circumstances that he became aware of necessitated him writing concerning something else. He says it like this: Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful that I write unto you and exhort you that you should earnestly contend for the faith, which was once and for all time delivered unto the saints. You see, while there are sometimes things that need to be addressed, sometimes other things override what is planned on being addressed, as was the case even with this epistle. But not Antipas. He was not one who had been reprimanded in an epistle written by an inspired man, as was Jude. Of course not. Antipas was a witness, that's another word for martyr here, for Christ. A martyr for Christ equals faithfulness, for sure. He died like Christ did. He died for Christ like Stephen did. He was the very personification of what it means in Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Because that's what he was. He was faithful to the extent that his life was given for Christ. Question: are we that faithful? What would you say the percentage of people, like a while ago, they profess that they know Him? What would you say the percentage is of those who profess that they know Him and those that are actually with Him? Someone says, well, we can't answer that but on a personal level. Well, let's do that then. Let's answer it on a personal level. What are some lessons that can be learned from this situation? Number one, Jesus knows where you live. Jesus knows where I live. And He knows whether we are really fighting the good fight of faith where we're at. He knows those who have very little opposition. And He knows those who have a whole lot of opposition. And He knows why some who have little opposition have little opposition. And He knows why some who have a whole lot of opposition have a whole lot of opposition. Now, what are you saying that for, Freddie? Because some people, by the way they conduct themselves, have a lot of opposition and they think it's being faithful, but it's not. It's just being obnoxious. That's why. Anybody can make enemies enough that nobody wants to be in the room with them. Does that equal faithfulness to God? I beg to differ. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, if someone can never find anybody that ever disagrees with anything they say, either they can't talk one, or they're not saying what they need to say. It's got to be one or the other. Jesus knows where we live, and He knows how we are responding. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Notice this situation. Paul and Apollos. Now, if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work, what sort it is. If any man's work abide, which he hath built thereon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burned, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet so as by fire. What is Paul talking about? What work is Paul referring to? He's talking about those who have been converted through the proclamation, the teaching, the motivation, all that Christians do in trying to bring others to Christ. Some people that we attempt to bring to Christ will never show their true colors until they face a problem. And the problem may be just going home and telling their wife, or just going home and telling their husband. That may be big problem number one. How do we respond to that? Now, think about it from a practical standpoint. Say, here I have been studying the Bible, and I find out that, I have been wrong my whole life. I've been believing that which is not so, and now I know the truth because I can read it with my own eyes, I can understand it with my own heart, I can be converted just as anybody can be. However, if I let anybody else know what I know and what I've done, then it's going to cause big-time problems. Question. What that person does from that time on is going to be a reflection of what they are made of. And I don't mean we're all made of flesh and blood and all that. I mean, it will tell what of our character is. See, somebody says, I'm going to keep it quiet. And I know people that have kept it quiet for 30 years. And then, lo and behold, when somebody found out that they had supposedly obeyed the gospel 3 decades ago, what's the value of this so-called converted person? Would you say that they're silver or gold or wood or kindling or stubble or a fuse on a fire? When they're going to get tough, the sissies leave. And there ain't no such thing as a sissy Christian. No way, no how. Antipas, my faithful witness. Satan influences around us constantly. And since Satan's influence is so prevailing, then there is no way that God would ever hold me responsible because of the power of Satan. Well, we know that's not the case. If you've got a town that's called the throne of Satan, this is where Satan dwells, and a man can stay faithful to the point that he gives his life for the cause of Christ, then you don't live anywhere like that. Do you? Is done life like that? Sometimes it's bad, but is it like that? Let me tell you something else. If it is like that, and if it's getting more like that, are you contributing to it getting more like that? When's the last time you put your foot down and said, it ain't going to get no worse from this time on if it's got anything to do with me? I ain't running for office either. Antipas was faithful, and guess what? That means you and I can be too. Antipas means, the word means, against all. And Antipas lived up to his name. And guess what? You can too. We've got a little bulletin article that I know John and Ann can find it that uses the common way that the Indians, American Indians, used to name their children, like Running Bear, and there's better ones than that, but such names as that. Well, what would your name be if the name that your parents gave you would be descriptive of the life that you would lead? Well, would it be Antipas? Would it be a name that is synonymous with faithfulness? Or would it be something that's the very opposite of that? Satan still rages. The Lord's people today need to realize that he still is seeking our own destruction. Notice this statement made by Jesus. If ye were of the world would love its own, but because you're not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. What? Do you really think that the world is supposed to love you? And then the next thing Jesus says sort of answers that before we have the opportunity to walk the plank yet. Remember, the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours too. Doesn't that stand to reason? If people were chasing Paul from city to city to try to kill him, if somebody is inviting us from city to city to come and talk, does that not sort of lend itself to the idea that maybe us and Paul was doing two different things? We're talking about the spiritual aspects of the matter. And do we really think that we could follow in the footsteps of Jesus and not face some of the same flack that Jesus faced? Well, that'd just go natural along with it, wouldn't it? The things, and is that not what we're trying to do? Is follow in the footsteps of Jesus. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21. And we got terminology like Christ-like and godly. What does that mean now? Does that not mean that we try to incorporate into our lives thinking about things the way that God thinks about things, the way that Christ thinks about things? And we look at the examples of what Jesus did, and we try to respond to things the way that Jesus responded to things. As a matter of fact, should it not be the case that the things that really rub the Lord the wrong way should probably rub us the wrong way too? And the things that Jesus lent His support to should be the things that we lend our support to. And the things that the Lord would oppose would be the things that we oppose. As a matter of fact, folks, I don't think that you can live a godly life or a Christ-like life without doing that. If you can, pray tell how. It's impossible. John 16:33. These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye may have peace. But not in the world. In me ye have peace. People want peace all the time. They want peace with God, and they want peace with a sin-cursed world. It doesn't work like that. If you have peace with the Lord, then it's very likely that tribulation is going to be your lot in the world. But don't worry about that. The Lord's overcome the world. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 10, 12. Put yourself in the position here of Timothy, who listens to the Apostle Paul. Paul says, but thou hast fully known my doctrine, manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, charity, patience, persecutions, afflictions, which came unto me at Antioch, at Iconium, at Lystra, what persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord delivered me. Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. Paul says, Timothy, you know what all I faced? You're going to too. And those faithful that you teach, they're going to too. And those faithful teach, they're going to too. Why is that? It's because there are two different groups here, folks. There are two different teams, if you would. And they have two different destinies. They have two different books by which they play. And the sooner we understand and realize that, the better off we'll be. God has a simple plan. You want to be like Antipas? Antipas obeyed this simple plan. The only way that he could ever be a martyr for Christ is he had to first begin living the Christian life, and he did that by obeying God's simple plan. It involved hearing it, believing it, repenting of his sins, confessing his faith, and being baptized into Christ for the forgiveness of his sins. At the same time, the Lord added him to his church. Have you done just that? If you're an accountable human being, you absolutely must do that if heaven is to be your eternal home. We stand ready to assist you in any way that we possibly can if you'll simply let us know how, while together we stand and while we sing.